end of the history of the Imperial Valley, and actually I took a class in 1987 from Joe Anderholt. Welcome, Samuel. Thank you. And Joe Anderholt was the historian for the Pioneers Museum at that time. And it wasn't really a credit class. I know there are some students that are coming from English 101 classes, right? Welcome. And a couple other classes. They're studying some environmental issues. Are you from Lowenstein's class? Humans class? Yeah. Lowenstein and humans over here. So Joe Anderholt was giving this class, and I actually was going through some of the materials, and I found the diagrams and things were really interesting. And then Bill Bowman, who was a very productive, prolific writer, came out with a book called Imperial, which is 1,200 plus pages long. So it was $55, and so I waited a couple years until I could get it for $7.50. And I got the hardcover, and I started reading that, and so I've been up to page 300 something, and I kind of bogged down. But the guy's just an amazing writer. He took 2 trips to the New River. He tested the waters of the Salton Sea himself, paid for that. He had gotten some genius grants, so I think he spent about $75,000 writing this book. And I think he made about $1,200 off of it. So it's a very strange book. It's indulgent as a nonfiction book. It's more like a diary or a journal. But it is packed full of some incredible information. He just did so much work, Bill Bowman, in that volume, Imperial. So I was just so excited to read it and see what was in there. And then in my reading class, I have a developmental reading class, and I wanted to find a novel for them to read that was related to Imperial Valley. So I found a novel called Wet Desert, written by an electrical engineer from Orange County. The guy used to go out to the Lake Powell and the Colorado River over and over again. So he fell in love with the Colorado River, and so he decided to write a novel called Wet Desert. And it's an eco-terrorist book based on the Glen Canyon Dam getting blown up. And so there's an engineer from the Bureau of Reclamation who's a frustrated dam builder, and they're not building dams anymore, and they're just kind of maintaining everything. And all the important people go off to Kenya to talk about the dam building in China and Africa, and he doesn't get to go, and he's really angry. And so then the terrorist blows up the Glen Canyon Dam, and he's got to throw into action, get in the Gulfstream jet, and fly to Lake Powell. So anyway, that's the way the book goes. And my students, Samuel was one of my students, having to read that book and learn all about the dam system along the Colorado River.
Where's
Glen
Glen?
Canyon is right across the river from Page, Arizona. So it's on the border between Utah and Arizona and northeast Arizona. So when they built the Glen Canyon Dam, I think it was in the early 60s, 62, that's when Lake Powell was formed. And so Lake Powell was about the same size as Lake Mead. And they both hold about 25 million acre-feet. So anyway, and I know Bill, I have Bill over here, he's my fact checker. And he's going to promise that if I make some mistakes, he's going to let me know. And I appreciate that, because I am going to make some mistakes. So anyway, I got really interested in the Imperial Valley water history, which is an incredibly fascinating history. And going back into the literature, I find there's much more written about it than I even knew. So we're going to touch on some of those things, and I think I'll get started. Are you ready, Mike?
Yeah.
Pretty good. All right, notice I put R and friends so you guys can help me out. I haven't done a run through this lecture. In fact, I was adding slides just half an hour ago. This is my 7th version of this, and it could go on forever, but I just wanted to kind of hit the high points of the early history of how the idea came to people to bring water to the Imperial Valley, and the flurry of activity that got it going right at the turn of the century. A little bit about how Hoover Dam got built and the response to the geographic and geological opportunities and challenges that we have here. So this is one of my favorite facts about the Imperial Valley. Where did all that dirt from the Grand Canyon end up? As you may know, Grand Canyon is about a mile deep. And you go back to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, is 4 billion years old, the old as the Earth. And so where did all that dirt go? Well, we all know it went here. It came here. Colorado River, over millions of years, carved out the Grand Canyon. And since we're at the tail end of the Grand Canyon, of the Colorado River, right above the Sea of Cortez in the Delta area, over millions of years, this depositions of alluvial silt and sand has been laid down right here. And that's why you can drill down 5, 6, 7,000 feet and not hit a rock. So this is our area, the Salton Sink, and this is more or less the present Salton Sea right here. Over eons of time, the Colorado River would fill this whole area, and we call that Lake Cahuilla. And you can see it is very extensive, all the way past Indio, and all the way down here to just north of Cerro Prieto, which is a volcanic remnant down about 23 miles south of the border. Right about here, right here at this angle, is the, what we would call that, the boundary between flowing, the watershed from flowing north, and then from here flows south. So you can see the Colorado River flows north into this sink anytime it overflows this ordinary channel. In the first decade, Howe compares the geography of Imperial Valley to his left hand. He says, you want to understand the Imperial Valley? Face north with your left hand up like this, and you can see that's the Imperial Valley. The bowl over your hand is the Salton Sink, and the north end we have the Salton Sea. And your hand lines, your lifeline, are actually like the New River on the west and the Alamo River on the east. He says, look, the palm of your hand here, the edge of the palm of your hand is like the course of the Colorado River. It's always at risk of flowing over this way instead of flowing south into the Sea of Cortez. So I thought that was an interesting little way to illustrate the geography of Imperial Valley. There's a satellite photo, and this is Lake Havasu up here. Parker Dam would be down here. And so come down Colorado River, we have Poston on the Arizona side. Here we have Ripley and Blythe and Palo Verde. And we're coming down here, and then we're going to have Yuma area. Of course, this area, this little white, grayish area, that's Mexicali. And this is all the Mexicali Valley. And so the Colorado River comes here. And that water, almost all of it is diverted into agriculture to the north. We still have, of course, the same geography, this area being a big sink. Just to orient you, Mount Signal is right about there, right on the edge of the irrigated land. Of course, you can see this used to be the Delta area, and it is pretty much bone dry. This area here is called La Ciénaga de Santa Clara, and it's a man-made reservoir. This is the very salty water that comes out of the Welton Mohawk drain. It used to go right back into the river, but that raised the salinity of the river too much, and it was unacceptable to Mexico that the river water that they got was salty. So instead, we dumped it out here in the desert and created a new bird sanctuary. It's about 15,000 acres of bird sanctuary that's kind of become vital for the Pacific Flyway. Okay, kind of nice, interesting picture here. Here's San Diego Bay, and this is all San Diego, Tijuana. Up here is, of course, LA. Way up here. And we have the Colorado River Aqueduct, brings water from Lake Havasu over to LA. By the way, what is all that green right there? That's our very famous algae bloom. And when that happens, there's a lot of oxygen sucked out of the water, and that's when the fish die. Because all the nutrients going into the lake feeds the algae bloom, and when the algae bloom occurs, the fish die. So one of the first guys who really noticed that the Imperial Valley could be irrigated by gravity from the Colorado River was Dr. Oliver Wozencraft. And he was a medical doctor who was actually part of the convention in 1849 when California statehood was being proposed. And he had gone through there earlier, and he says, I'm going to go check it out. So he had his own expedition in 1849, that same year, to the Imperial Valley and saw the opportunity to irrigate the land. And we think of him as being a wonderful guy, but just a few days ago, a friend of mine dug up some things that at the Constitutional Convention in California, and he said, yes, we want California to come in as a state with no slavery. So, because we don't want any blacks in California. He said this in public. I have the document. He says, we don't want them at all. So no slavery here is required because we're not going to have them. So he was a little bit of a megalomaniac too. When he passed through Texas, he stopped there and there was a big outbreak of cholera. And so he prescribed a few treatments, and he said, yes, I've cured cholera in Texas. He was, because of his role in the California Convention, he was appointed the Indian agent for the West. I wonder what kind of an Indian agent he was. But he was a very resourceful guy, and he went to the legislature in California in 1859, and he actually got the California legislature to grant him rights to 1,600 square miles of our desert. 1,600 square miles. And they say, oh, only one condition, you got to get U.S. Congress to approve of this too. So he went to U.S. Congress, and he actually had a bill floated that next year in 1860, but it was never ruled on. And so during the Civil War, they forgot about him, and he kept at it until 1887 when he died. So his idea was to be in charge of the whole thing by himself, in charge of the entire Imperial Valley, and that didn't work out for him. Okay, we're going back to this slide about how Lake Cahuilla covered up this whole area. Now, the Salton Sea right now, I think it's about 250 below sea level, the top of it. So, at this time, this lake covered the area up to 40 feet above sea level. 40 feet above sea level. And this is, I couldn't get this separate slide from the Redlands Institute, but this shows that from AD 700 to the present day, the Salton Sea area has filled in. Most of the time it was full. Most of the time it was full. So the last time they know it was full was in the 1700s.
You mean that whole section was full of water in the 1700s?
Well, I don't know if the entire thing. I mean, because there was different amounts. I wouldn't say the whole thing was full. That seems to be what's indicated by this top line. So, because this is the way it has been since 1900. So maybe that does mean the whole thing was full. So the area from Blythe to here is pretty flat. The fall from Yuma is, I think it's only 130 feet above sea level in Yuma. So the fall is so slight, that's when you see rivers meander. When the fall is slight. When the fall is steep, the river creates a very straight course. So yeah, that's why the river is meandering. Sometimes I'm going to go this way, sometimes I'm going to go this way. Remember on the ridge of your hand here, so it came into the Imperial Valley and filled up our sink. Which, by the way, you remember that the San Andreas Fault runs through here. So this side is the Pacific plate, and this side is the continental plate of the giant tectonic plate system on the Earth. So we have a spreading and moving upward Pacific plate with the continental plate being stationary. So that's why this is opening up and sinking right there. So Wozencraft, and there was a guy named Blake, William Blake, was part of the Williamson expedition, which was a government directed expedition. He was a geologist, part of that expedition, and so we can still see this line up at Travertine Point on the way to Coachella that shows the old high water mark, and still there today, so you can see that. So Wozencraft saw that, Blake saw that. Blake submitted a report, and it's a very famous report from the 1853 expedition. I really love this photo. This is a photo from 1915. I got off the Redlands Institute through the Coachella Valley Historical Society. Wonderful photo. Love the light and the darks and the hats and everything. So now before water, what was it like here? Well, we think of the desert on both sides of our valley, but remember, that wasn't the same as the desert in the middle. With a big bowl and you have water constantly evaporating, you're going to have the heavier soils on the edge and the lighter soils on the edge and the real heavy soils in the middle. The smaller particles, I'm trying to say. So clay in the middle and sand on the edges. So we had with some very hard soil, lots of little depressions, and not the vegetation you're going to see on the desert so much. But whenever there was an overflow from the river, which happened quite a lot, even though it didn't fill the whole valley, there would be overflow every year, and it would fill up part of the Mexicali Valley along the New River, the old Alamo River channel. And there were a lot of little lakes. So by Calexico, there was a lake called the Cameron Lake. And by Silsbee and out by Sealy, there was a lake called Blue Lake. Then on to the west of Imperial, there was a bunch of little depressions that they would fill up too. And so the earliest use of the Imperial Valley, right before the 1900s, was for cattle. So they would bring cattle from the mountains and they would run the cattle during the time of the year that the water was here. And there was plenty of pasture, and then when it started to get warm, they'd run the cattle back uphill. Maybe some of you know that the Salton Sea was, of course, dry, and it was because of over and over the salty water being evaporated out. It was actually mined through the Liverpool Salt Works, was the company name, in the bottom of the Salton Sea. So enter Charles Rockwood. Charles Robinson Rockwood was born in Flint, Michigan in 1860. And he went to engineering school, but he dropped out because he said he studied so much his eyes went bad. And then he was hired in Washington by the Yakima Railroad for a while. And he began to develop his skills in surveying and engineering, and also there was some irrigation in the Yakima area. And then he was hired by an entrepreneur out of Denver, a guy named Beatty, to do the surveying to see if they could actually irrigate the Sonoran side of the river. And so he came down and he had a whole party of people in 1892, including C.N. Perry, who you know from Calexico. I know there's 8 or 10 guys, and they spent a few months surveying. He found that you could not irrigate the Sonoran side or the Arizona side, but he saw what could happen over here. Now this is a picture from the first 30 years. They have a big picture of Rockwood, the first 30 years of book, one of the key books about the history of Imperial Valley. Found a copy that my grandmother dated me from 1931. So they have a lot about Charles Rockwood in there, including an article he wrote himself about what happened. And this, I've always seen this picture in there, and he looks sort of resigned to me, a little bit beaten, you know, like, oh well. And he was a kind of a hard luck Charlie guy. A lot of bad things happened to Charles Rockwood. In 1893, he took his survey back to John Beatty in Denver, and only to find out that Beatty, who had raised about $175,000, he was offering this stock to bellboys, and everybody he knew was buying stock in John Beatty's scheme. But he blew all the money. In fact, he couldn't pay Rockwood. But Rockwood, they owed him $3,500 himself, and also through. And so he never got paid. So he took this money, this debt, and by the way, Beatty was a total fraud. He had an office in New York, and he had all these glass cases with actual fruit in there, dates and tangerines and grapefruit and all these things over in New Jersey, and a beautiful office and a skyscraper, and it was all fake. It was totally fake because, of course, nothing had ever been done, not even close. In fact, they hadn't even filed for any water yet in the Imperial Valley. So Beatty was quite a fraud. He even defrauded his own cousin, James Beatty, who put up, I think, $30,000. And so he lost his money too. But I really like this picture. This is a picture in the First Decade book. And I just found this picture this morning. This book is now in the public domain. You can get it for free on Google Books. So this is Rockwood in 1892 was only 32 years old. So I kind of want to rather picture him more as a young man full of energy and plans and dreams. And I just see this here. Look at him. He's got, he's a man with ready to go. And so much different guy here. He's just sort of. I just like this photo a lot more. Well, Rockwood, he realized this is like big stuff. If you could irrigate the entire Imperial Valley by gravity, 500,000 acres for sure easy. on the Mexican side, on almost the same amount of money, 1 million acres of land, gravity fed. Wow, this is riches to be made. So Anthony Hoover was from Chicago, and they got together and they formed the California Development Company in 1896. So they formed the California Development Company in 1896, and they were pretty clever. You look in these books and it says, yes, the California Development Company was incorporated with a value of $1,250,000. So I've read this over the years and I was scratching my head. I'm not a good finance person, I'm an English teacher. So I'm wondering, where did they get the money, what's going on? And then I looked in another book and he said, what happened is that now, Rockwood never got paid, right? So he says, all right, we have a new company. Now the new company owes me the money. I've never been paid, $3,500. But I tell you what, I'll trade you this debt for 1/3 of the stock. And actually I think it was $1 million. So they gave him $333,000 worth of stock for the debt that the company before owed him. In other words, there's no money. They had all this stock at a par value of $100 each. But nobody gave him any money for that. It was just a number. So we have a California Development Company with almost no money. I think Heffernan, he put in some real money. I think $35,000, $40,000, real money. But the rest of it was just, okay, for your goodwill and your labor and your dreams, we're going to assign you this stock at a par value of $100. But there's no money. So they, remember, Rockwood has these surveys, and he has all the equipment from the surveys, and that's his value, because he holds that, and he owns that. So he gave that to the company for the $333,000 of stock. But he realized, well, the water has to go through Mexico. It's too costly to build an all-American canal through the sand dunes. It has to go through Mexico. So Mexico said, well, you got to form a Mexican company if you're going to do business here. So they formed this Sociedad de Riegos de Terrenos de Baja California. Nobody could say that. So you always see it just referred to as the Mexican company. So the CDC actually owned this company too. I told you that Rockwood was a hard-lick guy. So in Mexico, the land was owned by a guy named Andrade. So we still have a little town called Andrade, General Andrade, Guillermo Andrade. And he owned the entire Mexicali Valley, basically. I suppose it was a land grant to him. He was a well-cultured man. He studied in France and Spain. He was born in 1929, so he was an old guy already in 1900. He was an ambassador to the United States, or consulate or something in Los Angeles. So they had to get an option from him to buy his land, to run the canal through his land. But he didn't really care about that. It was a nuisance to him. Again, he was wealthy and well-established and old. So he would dribble out these options to him, to people. He sold the options to these guys in Scotland. I don't know how that happened. So Rockwood actually went to Scotland 3 times to try to buy the option for this land. The 3rd time he wasn't to Scotland because those guys had already died. And see, you get a deal almost done, the guy dies. So then he goes back and he finds this investment firm in London. And they said, okay, we like it. So that guy died. And everything bad happened to Rockwood. And so then he interested Forbes. There was a guy named Forbes. I don't know if it's the same Forbes family as today, but he owned the Bell Telephone Company. He sent his own man out to do a report, a guy named Anderson. When Anderson came back and said, yeah, it's a good deal. Forbes said, I don't think so. So it was at the moment of getting it done, and Forbes said, no, I don't think so. So over and over again, things didn't work out for Rockwood. In 1898, there was no money at all. He took a contract, he worked in Puerto Rico for a while just to be alive. And there's some passages where, and they had this incorporation, CDC was incorporated in New Jersey. I don't know why. They couldn't even pay the filing fee, the yearly filing fee to keep the corporation alive, and it was way past due. And so Heber actually hawked his wife's jewelry so that Rockwood could go back to New Jersey and make a plea for more money from someone. I mean, these guys were dead broke. I need to read you a little passage from the book here, The 30 Years, that Otis Talbot wrote. He was a newspaper man. And Howe was a newspaper man too, and then Talbot took over the Ivy Press, and they both wrote books. So it says about Rockwood, it says, he followed every clue that looked like it led to money. He crossed the continent time and again, visited Europe, saw the bag of gold at the foot of the rainbow several times, only to have it dissipated into the mists by the breaking out of a war, the death of a principal, or the underhanded perfidy of a friend. He was deserted by friends and backers, laughed at as the father of a chimera by unyielding bankers east and west. In all of it, he hung on with a tenacious hope. So, he talks about Rockwood, and another section is everything bad happened to Rockwood. So enter George Chaffey. Again, CDC really is almost just a dream. There's no money. Chaffey was 12 years older than Rockwood. He was born in 1848 in a province outside Ontario, Canada. His father was in the steamship business on lakes. And so he went to school until age 14 and he dropped out. But he studied on his own. He studied engineering books in the library. And he was also a seaman in his father's ships. And so he designed his own ships. And numerous ships were designed that he actually won prizes for, he won races with. And so he was really already a very accomplished man, even at a young age. His parents moved to Riverside in 1879, and so he came out for a visit that year or the next year. And he was just amazed by what was going on out west. He actually met Wozencraft too. Wozencraft was living in San Bernardino at that time. So he had talked to Wozencraft about this, and he thought, nobody's going to live there, it's too hot. It's not going to work, forget it. But him and his brother William, they met this guy Garcia who had a huge ranch. And Chaffey looked around and he said, you know what, I'll buy this $1,000 ranch for $25 an acre. And they felt good about it, they shook hands and they did. So what he did, he laid out the community of Etiwanda, named an Indian tribe in Ontario. Etiwanda, and so that he started the town, which today is still there. And he came in and he figured out that upstream there he could put in a hydroelectric plant to serve the city of Etiwanda. And he put of course he electrified his house. He lived in the Garcia's house for a while. And he put a light bulb on the roof that could be seen from Riverside. I don't know, it's 30 miles away or something. So this was the first hydroelectric plant west of the Mississippi. It was around 1881, 1882. And he subdivided that 1,000 acres into 10-acre lots. So he made a lot of money. The city of LA thought this was pretty impressive, so he laid out the electrical grid for the city of LA. Next thing he did is he started the town of Ontario. And it's real famous there because he named a straight line 250 feet wide or yards wide, I don't know, double wide promenade of Euclid. Okay, that's a big street in Ontario, perfectly straight, right? And he wanted to lay out this kind of utopian community in Ontario. And he did very well with that, made money there. He also created the town of Upland, California. So you can see that Chaffey had a lot going for him. There was a contingent of people from Australia that came over and they heard about Etiwanda in Ontario. And one of the members of this contingent was a guy named Deacon. And so he said, man, what you guys are doing is incredible. You have all this irrigation. That when he brought the hydroelectric power, he also brought irrigation. They had a lot of fruit trees, especially citrus. And so Deacon came over with his contingent from Australia and he said, why don't you come to Australia and help us? Which he did. He sold everything. And he moved to Australia with his brother. And they proceeded to transform 2 areas of Australia. He lived there 2 years, using the Murray River and the Darling River to create totally irrigated communities called Renmark and Mildura. He was there 11 years, a technical masterpiece. He invented a new pump called the Chaffey pump, and he became a member of the Royal Society of Engineers in London. He was just a totally self-made, important guy. And Deakin later became the Prime Minister of Australia, so they were buddies for life. Deakin was a real champion for Chaffey. But there were some problems there too. I don't quite understand what happened, but this was a technical masterpiece, but not very financially successful. So Chaffey, there were some problems, and he was sort of pushed aside. And his brother stayed there as a rancher, but Chaffey came back to California, and pretty much not very wealthy anymore. So he's back in 1897, 1898, he's back in California. And now that he's been in Australia, which is very hot, he thinks, well, people could live in Imperial Valley. Maybe this is a good idea after all. So Chaffey came down and figured out that he could see what was going on, and Rockwood and Hoover were at the end of their ropes. They had no other alternative. Chaffey drove a hard bargain. He said, I want control of the entire company for 5 years. I'm president, I'm the chief operating, I'm it. I'm the CDC now, and I will do this for 5 years, and I'll raise the money to do this. But first he went out and did his own survey, by the way. He did his own survey. He was out in the country with an Indian guide for 3 weeks. And so then he came back and he created these new companies, Imperial Land Company, Delta Investment Company, and he came back with a mutual water company idea, which he had used in Etiwanda in Ontario. And the mutual water company is when you buy one share in the water company, entitled to your water for 1 acre of land. See if I can show you his, did I put the survey in there? Okay, I wanted to make sure I can blow this up. You probably can't see it. No. Let me go back. You're not going to be able to see this very well, but here's the Rockwood wanted to take water from way up here above Yuma, by where we have the Hoover Dam now, and then bring it down to the river. And then this is his survey through here. He was going to bring in then a canal north. This is all Rockwood's plan. And so, according to Rockwood, this is going to take $1 million to do it. So when Chaffey went out and did his own survey, he found out, well, here's the Alamo River, where the natural overflow occurred during the floods. Every spring and summer, the water melted in Wyoming and Colorado, and the river flooded. Right? So this was one of the natural channels. So he figured out, well, geez, all I need to do is start right here with a little cut, make a canal down to here, and I got 50 miles of a free ride over to here, and then this is Sharp's Heading, where they created canals going this way and this way and this way. So he did it for $100,000, not $1 million. He put in this gate. So this is a very famous Chaffey gate that was 70 feet wide, 15 feet high. So starting in May of 1901, water came into Imperial Valley. And in June, only 2 or 3 weeks later, water reached the town of Calexico when they started growing crops. While he was doing the excavation, they were already building canals. So I have that slide coming up. Okay, well, so here's the Alamo River channel in Mexico. And you can see by this, this actually goes into Mexico. This is about 10 to 12 miles south of the border. It's a long way. So the city of Mexicali is right here. This is way south before it loops back around the sand dunes. See, the sand dunes are right here. Around the sand dunes and then back to the north. So this is how they made the canals. And there's just an incredibly impressive amount of building going on in those times. Just in the first 2 years, they built 400 miles of canals. And another 200 or 300 miles in the next couple of years. Just huge, incredible activity. I can't imagine the hubbub and the hum and the excitement of all the people that were flooding into Imperial Valley to create this new system that we have today. And this was famous. This was world famous. There was people coming around. It had, sort of looked like kind of a concentration camp, doesn't it? With the guard tower. But the journalists were all just camped out to see what was going on in Imperial Valley with this new era that was going to grow everything. It was famous across the country. I'm not sure the exact date of these photos. They weren't dated. These are all photos from the IID files that they shared with me. but you can see that very productive. Early days. We had issues. The Department of Agriculture issued a report in 1902 that said nothing's going to grow out there. Too alkaline. Now this was a very hurried report. They sampled very little parts of the valley. And so this report was very damning to the colonizing. But what about credit? Could you get credit? You got somebody was reading a report that said nothing's going to grow out here? No. The other huge problem we had was that Congress said, no, this is still a navigable river. Can't put any dams on it. Can't take the water for irrigation. We haven't decided yet how we're going to use this river yet. Can you get credit if the government says you can't use the water for irrigation? There's not going to be any dams on this river. We're going to have boats going up and down it. But it was funny because at the same time they were planning on building the Laguna Dam. So one part of the federal government says, yeah, nothing will go out there, and yeah, we're going to run boats up and down it, but we're going to build a dam here too, just in case. The Laguna Dam was authorized, I think, in 1904, and they started working on it in 1905. The Laguna Dam was just above Yuma. There was some problems locally. They were, they had 14 water districts. The service was not very consistent, spotty. Sometimes farmers couldn't get water. So they said, we need new leadership. We need a better program. We don't want to pay for water. We want it free. Let the government come in and take care of all this for us. And so there was actually a contingent of local farmers and citizens that wanted to get the Bureau of Reclamation to take over. Just to back up a little bit, starting in 1896, there were guys, and this was a system that just blows my mind. This was common in many places. You walk up to the river, you get your post, you hammer your post on the river, and on the side of it you staple, well they didn't have staples, right? So they had to nail on a little paper that says, I hereby claim 10,000 cubic feet per second of this river. And then you go over to San Diego to the county recorder office and say, here, I want to record this claim that I have right to 10,000 cubic feet per second of this river. And so there was a guy named Gonder and Heffernan and these various guys. They think that's pretty good idea. Walk up to the riverside, put their post in, go to San Diego. I claim 10,000 cubic feet per second of this river. Well, the book written by Mike Dowd has a list of 18 guys who all claim 10,000 cubic feet per second on the river. Now that's 180,000 cubic feet per second, right? Now think of a cubic foot per second as a basketball. Basketball is more or less a cubic foot. So think about 10,000 basketballs going by every second. That's a lot of water, right? Well, I just checked on yesterday's flow in the Colorado River off of Lake Mead was 14,000 cubic feet per second. Now it can flow up to 100,000, and during flood times it has. In fact, 90,000 went through, came into the Imperial Valley. But there wasn't 180,000 cubic feet per second in the river, ever. But those guys had claim to it under California law, and that really was established private property rights to water in the Imperial Valley right there. And even to this day, they have the axiom, first in time, first in line. So those were the first people to file on that water, and to this day they still have #2 priority on that water after Thomas Blythe. Thomas Blythe put his post on the side of the river in 1887. So he was the #1 guy that thought of this idea, hey, I want some of this river for posting. And he died a little bit after that. Okay. Well, actually this goes a little too far here. I want to show you this. I'm still working on the order of my slides. So here was here's the Chaffey Gate right here. So here's the border, California, Mexico, Colorado River. On this side is Arizona. So Chaffey put his gate right here. Now we're still in the United States, so Mexico can't say, well, that's our water. No, it's our water, and we're delivering it to you right here. So the California Development Company gave the water to the Mexican company right there. Now, the Mexican company has it for the rest of the time, and then they sell it to the mutual water companies. But the Chaffey Gate, being as how it was just a temporary gate, it's made of wood, and the soil is really bad. It's kind of like quicksand right here. They couldn't put it very low. They couldn't put it low enough. The river right here is 105 feet above sea level. Chaffey Gate, the bottom of it was 100 feet below sea level. So there's only a 5-foot difference between the top of the river and the bottom of the gate, which means there's not enough fall to make sure the river can pass through there during low river times. See, because the river goes up and down, right? Summer and winter. Winter times when the river's really low, because the water's all frozen. So the other problem is this water is full of silt. 1/3 pound per cubic foot of water is dirt, or was. So every year this would silt up. Right away we had problems with deliveries. So they, just in the second year, they call it a bypass, right? So there's a gate right here, but they cut a bypass. There's no gate. Water's not flowing. Hey, we don't have any water for our cantaloupes. We don't have any water. What are we going to do? We don't have any water for the lettuce or whatever. So cut the gate, give them some water. So that was 1902. Actually, there was another one here too. So in 1903, they decided to cut a gate here, an intake here, a big one. That's a sandbar. So in 1904, there was these unexpected floods, and this kept widening. And they thought, okay, we better close that down. So what they tried to do is they would hammer piles in. Let me see if I go back here again. Well, let's go back to the flood. You can see when it did flood, this is what happened. So the river started coming into the Imperial Valley instead of going into the Sea of Cortez. The whole river, little by little, came into the Imperial Valley. So this just flooded out Calexico in Mexico. Calexico, this huge wearing away of the soil. And then we had this cutback phenomenon where the water was cutting back. And the actual main canal going north and the Alamo Canal dropped like another 20 feet. And so F.W. Hull was able to put a power plant going from the canal, main canal, into the Alamo. And he was able to like double his output after the flood. Okay, this is actually the Alamo Waste Gate. So during the flood, they would divert the water into the new river. So most of the damage was done in the new river because the extra water was going into the new river, and then the agricultural water was still going into the canal. So here's a more modern picture of that area. This is Pilot Knob. Here's the big Q catch-on casino right here. Okay, this is the All-American Canal. And this was the old Colorado River channel was right here. That white line is really the boundary between Mexico and Arizona. So this is an interesting thing here. That's where the water from the All-American Canal goes into Mexico. Right there. And there's Morelos Dam, and then the water comes into Mexico. So down about here was where the canal was to here it is, the Alamo right here. That's the old channel. So you can see and then there's Yuma over here. Hey, Joe. Hi. I was just told the other day that the Rockwood Gate, which was put in 1910, I think, it's still there and the water goes through it the other way. Okay, before the water went through it this way, now the water goes through it back, so it's still there. So anyway, here's this mess where they had a Chaffey Gate up here, and then down here was where all the water was going through into the Imperial Valley. They tried several times to stop it. So here was one. I think I have a better slide on that. During the flood time, this was the Colorado River channel. Dry as a bone. There's a car driving in there. Where the Colorado River was supposed to be, nothing. There was entire flow of the Colorado River was coming into the Imperial Valley and filling up the Salton Sea. New river, full of water. This is actually a later slide from a levee, but it gives you the idea. Railroad tracks were flooded. What happened to the salt works? Flooded. The railroad had to be moved 3 times. Kept getting flooded. You can see it. So Southern Pacific was pretty concerned about this. That was a railroad through the Imperial Valley. Happy times up at the Salton Sea. The house is now just a boat dock.
But just a little over 100 years before that, if it's the 1700s, there was water there anyway.
Yeah. That's right. Oh, I had that twice.
Couple
So then this is, the way they would try to fix it is they would put these piles in there, and some of these are 60 feet long sometimes. They put them a row 2 of them, and then they drop mats of brush wired together with barbed wire, and then they drop bags of dirt. That was their first attempt. Didn't work. So they tried this 2 or 3 times, and Rockwood wanted to put a levee here, like a jetty coming out here to push the water over on this side of the island. Didn't work. Then they started to build the Rockwood Gate here. They abandoned that and tried to do this here. But as they got closer and closer, of course, the water was going faster and faster, and it washed away the island. They gave that up. So they tried several times to do this. This is the Rockwood Gate, which was in the middle of the river, and this is raising up. See, it just flowed away. It just flowed away. So finally, they got the idea that they had to build a train trestle across this thing, and build a train right across it, and they could dump rock in. What they wanted to do is just dump rock faster than the river could take it away. Now they failed so many times. They tried, I count 9 times they tried. So in October of 1906, they had, that was when the gate lifted up and floated downstream. Okay. November the 4th, the river was all back in the channel. I think I have a picture of that. Actually, it's in the wrong place. Yeah, here's my picture. So November 4th, they had this rail line across here. It was all plugged up. But then just 3 weeks later, a month later, wiped out the end of the levee, came across here, and back the whole river into the Imperial Valley. So these are some amazing pictures of all the damage. So Rockwood said, okay, I think I'm out. And I think Southern Pacific came in and said, you're out. We're going to bring H.T. Corey in. And the Southern Pacific Railroad assumed the entire problem because the California development companies just didn't have any assets. They couldn't do it. Remember, the entire river is coming in the Imperial Valley. At some point, it's 90,000 cubic feet per second. It's a huge flow. What's going to happen? The entire Imperial Valley is going to be filled up again, just like it was. It's going to wipe out the entire project. Nothing will be left. So H.T. Corey was an engineer who was also very famous. He had been a professor at Missouri. He had a degree in engineering, master's in civil engineering, master's in mechanical engineering. He was famous. He wired cities, mansions. So he had a pedigree also as an engineer. He worked for the Southern Pacific. So they sent him here, and he said, okay, let's take care of this. So they got all the rock carrying cars for the entire west of the United States. They basically shut down the Tucson and the LA railroad system for about 4 weeks. They got rock from 200 miles away. They had like 1,000 rail cars, and they were just pouring rock in there as fast as they could. This is actually, I'm not sure if this is from the flood or later levee damage. Their floods kept happening until the All-American Canal was built. So, and point out that most of the workers were Native Americans. The Kukupa Indians were the ones doing the work. They didn't live too well. So this is when Corey came in, and he had 2 trestles side by side across this whole expanse. So they brought in these side rock cars, and they drop the rock in and move them out, bring in the next group. Now this is actually from later. The Imperial Irrigation District wasn't formed until 1911. But in order to keep the river out of the Imperial Valley, they had to build hundreds of miles of levees all through that valley. And they had rail lines across the top of them, and so that was the Imperial Irrigation District's first job, was to keep the water out until the All-American Canal was built, well, until Hoover Dam was built in 1930. And so we think this is H.T. Corey right here. Eaton Randolph was the assistant to Harriman, who ran the Southern Pacific. I showed you that slide. So here it is, getting it done. Right? This whole thing is filled. And I forgot to mention that underneath this, there's a 100 feet wide straw mat, brush mat. But this time they have 3/4 inch wire cables. On cross pieces are 3/8 inch wire cables. So they put those down on both sides, 100 feet wide. So they had to put those down with piles on that. And it's just incredible. It just was massive. They spent about $2.5 million in the course of a few weeks to get this done. Now, this was finally closed up February 7, 1907. So we had basically all of 1905 and all of 1906 with water running into the Imperial Valley. Now, this was a Rockwood Gate that was put in 1910. So this is the Colorado River Channel going south. And this is the water going into the Alamo River, Alamo Canal, heading to the Imperial Valley in this way. And so this picture is actually 1934. So this was kept into existence until all the way up until 1940, when the All-American Canal came in full service. That's like a Rockwood Gate. So that finally the river's under control. Again, that's a Rockwood Gate, and that's the water going into Mexico. See the dredgers, keeping this clear of silt, so it doesn't plug up again. This picture isn't too old, but this is the Morelos Dam, and this is a Colorado River channel going south toward the Sea of Cortez. Today, there's no water in here, and this is all overgrown. And this is the entry gate for the canal system into Mexico. So that's right here. Today, this is the water going into the canal system into Mexico. Now, this is Phil Swing. I don't have a whole lot on him. We're almost out of time, but Phil Swing is really the key guy in this whole picture after the first disaster. Phil Swing was from Riverside. He went to UC Berkeley, I'm pretty sure. His brother was a lawyer, and he became a lawyer. So he couldn't be a lawyer in the same town as his brother. So he came to Imperial Valley, started up as a lawyer in Imperial Valley, I think in the early teens. He was a very smart guy. He was quite dapper and handsome. Right away, he distinguished himself, and he became a Superior Court judge. Then he became the legal counsel to the Imperial Irrigation District, and then he was elected congressman to, I forget the number of the district, but I think it was District 7. He was elected to Congress. Now, how does a guy from El Centro get elected to Congress? His district covered from here to Bishop and everything south of LA. So that included San Diego County, San Bernardino County, Riverside County, Tulare County, Inyo County. There's 7 counties were in that district. Phil Swing got elected. What was his mission? Hoover Dam. That was his mission. As soon as we had that problem in 1904 to 1907, they said, we got to dam the river. We're gonna have this problem forever. So Phil Swing wrote the Swing-Johnson bill. Hiram Johnson was a Democrat, and he was the governor of California and later became a senator from California. He was a Democrat, and Phil Swing was a Republican. So together they wrote the Swing-Johnson bill to fund the building of Hoover Dam and the building of the All-American Canal. So he had to put this through Congress 3 times before it was passed in the late 1920s. Now Hoover was president, right? But Hoover was against it. And Hoover was actually, he headed up the Colorado Commission when when they divided up the Colorado River between the upper basin states and the lower basin states in 1922, he led that commission. But he was against the Hoover Dam because he didn't want the government involved. He wanted the farmers themselves to pay for Hoover Dam. He wanted a low dam just for irrigation. He wanted the farmers to pay for it. But a lot of other people wanted a high dam that would be also have electrical power. And so those folks won. And we have, so he enabling legislation in 1928 wrote, I think it was $150 million, $142 million to pay for the Hoover Dam and the All-American Canal. So this was the All-American Canal being built. There's All-American Canal. Bill Swing in 1942, when the All-American Canal was finally officially dedicated. This is a Leo Hetzel photo of Black Canyon. So people think of it as Boulder Canyon, but Hoover Dam was actually built in Black Canyon. So Leo Hetzel is a famous local photographer, and he took this picture. I love this photographic transition because there's that same formation again. The Hoover Dam was built right there, 600 feet high of concrete. And power plants. Here's the, from the spillways, these are the tunnels they built to de-water, to dry up the river. 50-foot diameter tunnels. There's another two. And they built Hoover Dam from 31, I think, till 35. Came on. Great photo. These are the intake towers. So this is the upstream side. And there's a boat right here. People walking around. Incredibly impressive structure. So anyway, that's my lecture. And if you have any questions, we got a few minutes or comments. I know we have John Polich in the audience, who's a big authority on Mr. Chaffey. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
How many miles are there farm canals?
I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000, I think. I think up to 3,000 miles total. Count all the laterals and drains, counting drains. Bill, do you know that question? How many miles of total canals are there in Imperial Valley?
1,500.
Oh, 1,500 miles? Okay.
So if you look at the history, it was natural that the water was kept coming here off and on over the years.
That's right.
And it wasn't until man-made stuff came that it kept the water away from this valley.
That's right.
I might make one comment on the silt. The Gila was the source of most of the silt.
Okay.
And the reason for that was the Texans had moved their cattle in without any regard to the land and overgrazed it terribly. And that sent the silt down, and that's one of the reasons why all the engineers were off somewhat, because they were looking at the historic rise of the river, historic changes of the river, and this had thrown all of the historic changes off.
Just to back up a little bit, John, so let them know, this is the Gila River coming in here. Yeah, so there's the Colorado, and the Gila River comes, and Salt River feeds that too, right? From way up to the east side of Arizona. So you say again that, so the cattlemen overgrazed?
Overgrazed that valley area, and so all of that silt came down the Gila.
And that also raised the flood.
And that raised the flood.
Because of erosion, right?
And it made the natural shift, speeded up that natural shift to send the water to the valley.
Okay.
And so is the clay originally from the Grand Canyon over thousands of years?
Well, the clay and the Gila. So both these, this is a river source here, and this too. And plus there's all kinds of tributaries coming into the Colorado up north, in Utah and Wyoming and Colorado. Yeah.
But originally, like, if you go back way thousands of years, it was something different underneath the flood.
Right,
Like
yeah.
the sandy soil or something?
Well, this was, now remember, this is opened up. See, this was south. This was, at one time, there was no water here because of the plate shifting, moving forward and out like that. If you look at the big map of California, Baja California Peninsula, you can see that it tucks in very nicely down at Acapulco. And so that's moved up and out like that over, I'm not sure how many millions of years, but that's why this is kind of a spreading, this is the boundary, plate tectonic boundary. So this is a spreading area, and that's sunk, and then the silt and the earth from the Grand Canyon has filled it up. Yeah. Again, this flows north here.
I'm going to ask you a quick question then on that.
Sure.
So was the silt calculation on the Colorado made below the Gila? Because it was my understanding that like the silt works in Imperial Dam are actually much larger than they need to be, because they thought there was going to be a lot more silt than there has actually been coming down that. Is it because the original silt amounts were calculated below below the Gila as opposed to above it?
The Gila wasn't bringing in that much silt historically, but when that overgrazing occurred, it really wiped out the valley. And so that it suddenly became a greater silt producer than the Colorado itself. So it was, as far as I know, that was the key thing in throwing all the engineering on.
Well, I think his question is, here's the desilting area of Imperial Dam. So here's Imperial Dam, and the water comes through here and then goes to All-American Canal. So this is a way that they continue to keep silt out of the All-American Canal by slowing it down, letting the silt drop out, and then they dredge this out to, see this is the same year, but this is now going to be dredged out, dug out, and actually take the silt out of the river. So the All-American Canal was kept clean of silt. So he's saying, did they over-engineer these because we didn't really have the silt problem? Like, part of that question is, we don't have so much of a silt problem because of the dams, because of the Glen Canyon and Hoover Dam.
What do they do with the silt now?
I don't know. I think let's just dump it nearby. I don't know what they do.
The river.
Pardon me?
It dumps back into the river.
They sluice it at Laguna, right? That's right. It dumps back into Laguna Dam.
When was the All-American Canal built?
It was started in 35, I think, and finished around 40. Or maybe before that, I'm not exactly sure. I was hoping somebody from the Pioneer Museum would be here.
What's a good source of that field?
Yeah, it's called Phil Swing, and in fact, it's one of my references, Phil Swing and Boulder Dam by Beverly Moeller Bowen, B-O-W-E-N. I can lend it to you. I got it.
Since you did all that history, looking at the past, what do you think is the future of the Salton Sea? You can't look into the past without speculating on its future.
I don't really know much.
No?
Well, it's just whether the money's available. It's a lot of money to keep it alive, and it just doesn't look like the money is going to be available. They're going to try to keep as much of it watered through various schemes of keeping some water on it. That's the key thing, try to prevent it from receding, so there's a lot of exposed playa. And so there's some, in fact, they had a renewable energy conference just last week over at the Barberworth Country Club. And they talk about some ideas for solar ponds and things like that. I don't know. I'm not very positive and optimistic about it. David's behind you shaking his head.
That's aggressive.
Shake, they said yes or no.
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 You might ask Bill Dubois. He's been on this subject for 60, 70 years, I think.
I've forgotten all I knew.
I don't blame you, Bill. I had to do a lot of studying to remember what I knew too.
I lived there for 20 years, over 20 years now, and there's been so many studies. I'm kind of going to study it to death. I mean, how many times do you have to reinvent the wheel and how it rolls around? You know, I don't get
I
it.
agree with you. But there's a very healthy Salton Sea Authority that's got a lot of ideas. And I got some things from a guy from the Redlands Institute at the University of Redlands, very passionate about saving the Salton Sea. There's so much data available. I don't know what's going to
I just
happen.
don't want to see it end up like that other place, Owens
Owens
Valley.
Lake.
Yeah.
If I had to make a prediction, I would say nothing will be done on the Salton Sea.
You'll just get dry up.
Paper in Palm Springs, you guys and Son did a special, did a section on it. And they started out the article with a really neat quote about the governor of California recognizes the Salton Sea and its issues and feels that we should fully go wholeheartedly at finding a solution to the CA's problems. And then hopefully the governor was Ronald Reagan.
Yeah. Well, the Salton Sea at one time was just a huge attractor for recreation. I saw in Coachella Valley has all these pictures of boat races
My
and
wife used to go swimming. in
traffic
boat,
jams.
Water skiing.
One of the major efforts recently was made by Sonny Bono originally to do
Right.
a lot of work there when he came into Congress. And his passion was really developed because as a teenager out of Orange County, that's where he learned to water ski. And he saw all the potential there because of those adventures he had to do.
I guess you need another Mr. Chaffey.
Yeah, Bill Gates, I think. Write a check for $1 billion, maybe.
That would be enough.
That would be another $100 million a year, now until eternity. Well, it's a sump, right? It's just it's an outlet, there's no outlet, it's a drainage hole, it's a sump. And is that the best use of water, to just let it sit there? And it's getting saltier every year. So we have a system of irrigation in Imperial Valley is to push the salt through the soil and out deep drainage into the drains and into the Salton Sea. So the salinity of the Salton Sea is rising year by year. I think we're at 1.5 times the ocean salinity right now.
Well, I think it was about 15 years ago, more or less, that Mike Morgan hired a company to make a plan for the Salton Sea. And as I looked at it, I thought it was a feasible effort. It was very expensive, and so it didn't fly. But that engineer's conception was, I think they were from Holland, and they knew something about reclaiming the sea. And I've forgotten what amount of money they predicted it would cost, but their idea was to make a concentric pond. As the bottom of the sea got lower, and it looked pretty feasible. And I think it's considered impossible now. I don't think it's impossible from an engineering point of view. I think it's impossible from a political point of view.
Mm-hmm. Let's see what the high level, we'll come up with anything. So yeah, like you say, Roland, there's been so many studies. So they talk about different set levels of salinity. Some parts of the sea would be really, really saline. These are all different scenarios, different alternatives. But I have seen the concentric ring idea. I don't know where that is. You can just do a fine. Concentric ring. Okay. Concentric ring dikes with cascading reservoirs. So a hypersaline in the middle, and then the other parts are allowed left.
Are you still gonna do that? They'll cut the sea off of the 2/3 bottom and 1/3 top, north top, that would be able to be used as for people and stuff, and let all the bottom stuff just.
And that's what I heard was the most favored plan.
So you can drive across the other side.
Yeah, dike it all the way across it, make the northern half still for recreation, and the southern half like for bird habitat. Just very, very shallow. That would be make some serpentining wetlands in the south. That seems to be the most favorite alternative. And I've heard people say, oh yeah, we're in the south, we get the buddy of the Salton Sea. They get the nice in the north, where my uncle is. All right, well, thanks for coming, I appreciate it.